Weeks passed, and the village of Umualu moved with cautious silence, as though whispering too loudly might summon something they had tried to forget. The rains had finally stopped, but their traces lingered. Trees leaned where roots had loosened, walls wore streaks of red mud, and the air remained heavy with dampness and something else, something old and watching. No one spoke of Ndidi openly, but her name was heavy on the wind. Children used it as a dare, whispered it during hide-and-seek, and dared one another to run past the twin grave mound near the edge of the bush. The place had never been marked properly, but everyone knew where it was. The soil had never firmed. Even the grass refused to grow there. Then one morning the earth began to shift. At first, it was subtle, just a slight hollowing in the center of the mound, like someone had pressed a shallow thumbprint into it. The villagers noticed but said nothing. But by the fourth morning the depression had deepened. The ground looked as if it had begun to exhale slowly, tiredly, over time. It was the children who noticed first. A group of them, on their way to fetch firewood, had passed near the grave when they heard it. A long, low sound, too soft to be wind, too heavy to be imagined. It was not a voice, not quite. Not a moan. Not even a wail. It was a sigh, long, exhausted, unmistakably human. They ran screaming back to the compound, wood forgotten, feet muddy and voices frantic. The grave sighed, they cried. It sighed like someone who has waited too long. The elders called for silence and scolded the children. Foolish talk, they said. Do you want to wake things that should not rise? But that night even the elders did not sleep well. Dogs howled without cause. Pots cracked in silence. And beneath the night wind, that same sigh could be heard if one stood still enough, quiet enough. Soft and sorrowful. Waiting. On the seventh day, a hunter who had ventured near the grave returned to the village with shaking hands. He had not seen a ghost nor heard a voice. What he had seen chilled him more. The grave, he said, is breathing. That was enough. The next morning the council of elders, now greatly reduced since the death of the chief, gathered in hushed urgency. They called for the remaining priest, an old man whose legs trembled when he walked. He brought charms. He brought kola nut and feathers. He brought a caged white hen to offer before they touched the earth. A crowd gathered, silent. No one wanted to be near the grave, but no one dared miss what was happening either. The soil had sunk deeper, as though something underneath had moved, pressing against the roof of the earth from below. Dig it, one elder said, voice tight. We must see. The young men hesitated. Dig, the priest repeated, louder this time. And so they began. The first spadeful of dirt released a smell, not of rot, but something damp and old, like clothes left in a clay pot too long. As they dug deeper, the odor changed, thickening into the unmistakable scent of death. But only halfway down did something shift. The shovel struck something soft. Not bone. Not wood. Something that gave beneath the metal but resisted, like flesh. One of the young men dropped his spade and stumbled back. Something touched me, he said, pale. It moved. Keep going, the priest commanded, sweat streaking his face despite the chill in the air. They uncovered the grave completely. There were two bodies. Ojugo's first, coiled into herself like a question. Her skin had darkened, pulled taut over bone. Her fingers were curled, nails fallen away. The flesh on her cheeks had sunken, and her mouth had opened slightly as though in surprise. Her eyes were hollow, dark. Beside her lay Ndidi. And Ndidi had not changed. Her skin was unblemished. Pale, yes, but firm. Her hair, though crusted with dirt, had not grayed or thinned. Her face was calm, serene. Her lips were slightly parted as though mid-breath. And her eyes, half open, glistened faintly in the morning light, the irises catching the sun like wet stones. A murmur passed through the crowd. She was not rotting. She looked asleep. One woman screamed. Another fainted. The young men dropped their tools and backed away quickly. The priest himself staggered forward, unsure whether to touch her or run. He reached out slowly with his staff and nudged Ndidi's shoulder. The body rolled slightly and her head lolled toward him. From her mouth came a whisper. No one heard what it said. Or perhaps they all heard different things. But every person swore they heard something. A word. A name. A plea. A warning. The priest fell to his knees. She is not dead, he whispered. She is not alive, an elder countered quickly. She is between. That is worse. A bird shrieked overhead and flew directly into the sky as if fleeing something. She should not have been buried, the priest said, voice cracking. We must take her out. Cleanse her. Set the death right. But the elders argued. They argued for hours, voices rising and falling like the wind around them. Some said it was a punishment, that the ground had cursed them for spilling innocent blood. Others claimed she had been a witch after all, and the earth refused to claim her. Living flesh does not sleep beside death for weeks untouched, one elder spat. That is not natural. And yet it is real, the priest snapped. You saw it with your own eyes. In the end, fear won. They could not agree on what to do, so they chose the coward's path. Seal it, one of them said. Let the earth finish what it began. The order was given. The grave was to be closed again, more tightly this time. Thicker soil. Stones laid across. Charms buried around the perimeter. Salt. Bone powder. Let no one speak her name again, they commanded. Let her sleep. Let her stay forgotten. And so they buried her again. Alive or dead, no one dared to say. They buried Ojugo, who had decayed like a child of men. And they buried Ndidi, whose lips had not yet stiffened, whose eyes had not closed. Mama Ebel was not there to see it. She had vanished a week after the rain stopped. Her hut still had her cooking pot, her mat, her favorite red scarf folded on the wooden stool. But she was gone. Some say she followed her daughter into the bush. Some say she was called away in a dream. Others claim she left because she knew this would happen, that the earth would not rest while her daughter's truth remained smothered in silence. After the resealing, the ground did not shift again. Not for many days. But no one walked near it. No one fetched wood near it. Even the wind refused to stir the trees above it. At night, the sighing continued. Not every night. But some. On those nights, doors were barred tighter. Children hid under raffia mats. Old women lit palm oil lamps and prayed. Young men carved protective symbols into their doorposts with trembling hands. A sickness began to spread, not of the body but of the mind. People began to mutter to themselves, to speak to invisible things. They claimed to see a girl standing in the shadows with half-open eyes and muddy skin. Always watching. Never blinking. The priest tried to hold rituals. He tried to cleanse the grave from afar. But nothing held. In dreams the villagers saw her. Always half awake. Always whispering something they couldn't quite hear. She did not scream. She did not cry. She only sighed. And the sigh said, "You buried the truth." But truth breathes. One night a boy disappeared. A boy who had once mocked her years before. They found his shoes beside the grave. Nothing else. Then a second disappeared. A girl this time. She had once stolen fruit from Didi's basket and laughed when she cried. They stopped counting after the fourth. It was said the grave had become a door. And doors do not stay closed forever. They sealed it again with iron. With teeth from a leopard. With chants they hadn't used in 3 generations. But the ground still breathed. The sigh still came. And beneath it all, those who listened closely swore they could hear something else too. A heartbeat. Soft. Patient. It started with the flies. 1 or 2 at first, buzzing aimlessly near the grave that held the chief's beloved daughter, Ojugo. Then 10. Then 50. Then clouds. Thick, oily and endless, like black smoke made of wings and eyes. The villagers tried not to notice. They averted their gaze when they passed by the mound, walked faster, and whispered of other things. But the flies would not be ignored. They clung to the soil above Ojugo's side, spiraled above her portion of the grave like a whirlwind. They refused to scatter. They swarmed in the heat, in the rain, and even on cool, dry mornings. No matter the time of day, they circled and dipped, as if feeding on something that hadn't finished dying. Ndidi's grave, just beside it, remained untouched. It wasn't just the absence of flies. It was what replaced them. Grass grew thick and lush on her side, deep green even when other parts of the village turned brittle from heat. And then came the flowers, bright blue ajasafe blossoms, shy white abeek buds that usually only bloomed at the edge of the forest. They opened like offerings, silent and certain, curling around the soft mound that held her body. Or what the villagers still feared might not be a body at all. The contrast was too sharp to ignore. One grave teeming with rot and darkness, the other blooming with things that should not have grown. When Ojugo's mother, Mama Ojugo, first heard of the flies, she scoffed. Nonsense. There are always flies near the bush, she said. But that night, her dreams betrayed her. She saw her daughter sitting at the edge of the river, in the same blue wrapper she was buried in. Her feet were bare. Her face was streaked with tears. Her mouth opened as if to speak, but only flies poured out. Thousands of them, crawling over her lips, her tongue, her chin, wings buzzing where words should have been. Mama Ojugo woke screaming. The next night it happened again. But this time Ojugo did not weep. She screamed. She opened her mouth and screamed until her face cracked down the middle, and something long and black slithered out, whispering her mother's name with 1,000 tiny mouths. The third night, Mama Ojugo did not sleep at all. Her husband, once the chief's advisor, began to have his own dreams. Ojugo danced alone in the market square, spinning, her eyes rolled back, her arms covered in red ants. She danced toward him, and when he tried to run, his feet sank into the earth as if it had decided to keep him. By the end of the week, the entire family was sick with fear. They brought incense to the grave, bitter roots wrapped in cloth, dry sage, sweet-smelling powder pounded from bark. They lit it with trembling hands, their lips forming prayers, their faces tilted upward in desperate hope. But the smoke did not rise. Not fully. As soon as it reached the mound above Ojugo, it twisted. Curled away sideways as if blown by a wind no one could feel. It never touched the soil. It never lingered over her. Instead it fled. It ran. Mama Ojugo tried again, this time kneeling beside the grave, her hands trembling as she held the clay bowl of incense. Rest, she begged. Please rest, my daughter. I didn't know, none of us knew. The smoke struck her face like a slap. Her eyes swelled shut for 3 days. Even the priest, when he was called, could find no answer. He offered prayers, chants, charms, but the flies returned stronger the next day, twice as many, crawling across the grave in dizzying spirals. They never touched Ndidi's side. Ndidi's side glowed. That was the word someone used one morning, though they were ashamed to say it aloud. It glows, whispered one old woman as she passed, basket on her head. Like something holy sleeps under there. No one laughed, because it was true. Her grave never stank, never oozed water even during the rains. The air above it was clear. Cling. One woman swore her child stopped coughing when she sat nearby. Another claimed her bad knee stopped aching when she walked past. A boy, struck dumb since birth, muttered a word after picking one of the white flowers blooming there. Her name. Ndidi. Even the bees chose her. They buzzed gently around the flowers and returned each morning as if summoned. The grave became a shrine. A forbidden one still, no one dared speak of her. With praise, but it drew eyes. It drew questions. And it drew guilt. The village's fear was becoming something else. Something worse. They had buried 2 girls. But only one was being claimed by the earth. And now, the one they had loved, the one they had chosen, was turning her back on them. In dreams, in rot, in rage, Mama Ojugo began to unravel. She stopped eating. She sat outside her hut with her head wrapped in black cloth, her fingers caked with soil from clawing at her own compound floor. When someone brought her water, she poured it into the dust. If she will not rest, she murmured, then none of us deserve to. She took to pacing the boundary of the village at night. Villagers whispered that they heard her talking to someone, her voice low and pleading. Sometimes she laughed. Other times she screamed until her throat bled. Her husband disappeared soon after. His sandals were found beside the grave. One of the elders, shaking with age and regret, made a final attempt. He walked to Ndidi's grave with a white feather in one hand and a bottle of gin in the other. He knelt beside the mound, placed the feather on the soil, and poured the gin in a slow, respectful line. You were wronged, he said, voice soft, hoarse, and we cannot undo what was done. But maybe you can have peace so that we may too. Nothing happened. Not right away. But later that night, the elder awoke to find a single blue flower blooming on his doorstep. No stalk. No root. Just the blossom, fresh and open, its petals still wet with dew. He wept like a child. The next day he told the others, she has heard. But she has not forgiven. The flies meanwhile grew bolder. They began to enter homes. Only those who had once praised Ojugo above all. They crawled beneath cooking pots, nested in pillows, drank from water gourds. Even fire could not chase them. They watched, swarming on walls and ceilings like silent judges. One girl, Ojugo's cousin, woke to find a single fly inside her mouth. Another found her braids undone, her scalp bleeding from hundreds of tiny bites. Eventually, some villagers began to speak what they had long buried in silence. She used to mock her. She slapped Ndidi once in front of the whole market. She stole her carving knife and laughed when the girl cried for hours. She told the chief Ndidi was a curse. She lied. The stories spilled like water breaking through a weak dam. And the more they spoke, the more the village saw clearly what they had not before. Ojugo had been beloved, yes, but not kind. She had been beautiful, yes, but cruel. And Ndidi? She had been strange, quiet, different. But she had never raised her voice. Never accused. Never struck back. Now it was too late to protect her. But perhaps not too late to listen. Some of the younger women, silently and without permission, began leaving flowers near Ndidi's grave. Others placed pieces of fruit, carved beads, painted stones. No one made a spectacle. No one admitted it aloud. But every morning the offerings multiplied. One morning, a child placed a handmade doll of raffia beside the grave. That evening the flies vanished. All of them. Gone in one breath. And for the first time in weeks, the air over Ojugo's grave was still. But it was not peace. It was waiting. The dreams didn't stop. Mama Ojugo, thin as bone now, wandered into the village square one evening and collapsed. When they gathered around her, she opened her eyes and whispered, "She doesn't want incense. She doesn't want flowers. She wants the truth." Then she went silent. That night, a thunderstorm split the sky wide open. The rain came down hard, not with rage but cleansing. And in the morning both graves were damp. But only one bore footprints, tiny, barefoot, pressed in a circle around Ndidi's grave, like someone had walked and walked, guarding it. The other grave remained still. But when they passed it they smelled fire. Not the fire of punishment, but the fire of purging. And somewhere in the village a girl's sigh echoed once more, soft, relieved, like the first breath after being believed. The storm came without warning. One moment the sky was heavy and gray, brooding over the village like a clenched fist. The next, it broke open with a scream of thunder that shook the palms to their roots. Lightning danced across the sky like spears of the ancestors hurled from unseen hands. And then the rain came, not in drops but in sheets. Thick, relentless. Like the sky had been holding its breath for years and now exhaled everything it had all at once. The graveyard, already soaked from months of strange weather, took the worst of it. By dawn the footpath leading to it was a river. Graves melted at the edges, their shapes slurred into dark puddles. The wooden markers that had once stood tall now floated crookedly in the rising mud. The villagers watched from a distance, their feet bare in the wet grass, unwilling to come close. No one spoke of it but they all saw. Bones. White and sharp, poking through the broken soil like old secrets refusing to stay buried. They rose from the side where Ojugo had been laid, spindly fingers, a curved rib, something that looked like the bottom of a jaw. The earth had rejected her fully now, vomiting up what remained of the chief's daughter in pieces and fragments. But beside her, untouched, was Ndidi's grave. Even as the water tore through the rest of the burial ground, churning up rot and clay, her mound held. No bone surfaced. No foul scent escaped. Her grave looked untouched, the water circling it as if avoiding something sacred or something feared. When the rain slowed and villagers dared draw closer, they saw the impossible again, her body. The topsoil had split just enough for her chest to be seen beneath a thin film of mud. Her wrapper still clung to her skin. Her face was pale, yes, but smooth. Her eyelids shut. Lips soft, slightly parted, as though she might sigh if left undisturbed. Not swollen. Not blackened. Not sunk with decay. Oh, sleeping. Children who crept close ran screaming back, swearing they saw her thumb twitch or her mouth move, or her breath fog the air for just a moment. "She's not dead," one whispered. "She never was," said another. The whispers grew. They slipped through cooking huts, around palm trees, across courtyards and into bedrooms. They followed women to the stream and clung to the feet of men returning from the bush. The village, once so certain of Ndidi's guilt, now spoke her name in softer tones. She was wrongly buried. She was wrongly blamed. They killed the wrong one. Mama Ojugo hadn't been seen in days. Some claimed she had gone into the forest, mad with guilt. Others said she had taken shelter inside the priest's compound, fasting and begging for the gods to forgive her daughter. But the priest was not speaking either. Not after what happened that morning. He had gone to the graveyard alone before the sun rose. He told no one where he was going, but someone saw his lantern flickering along the path. When he returned hours later, his hands were shaking, his lips dark. His eyes rolled upward when anyone asked what he'd seen. It was a child who later told the full story. She'd followed him, barefoot and silent, not out of mischief but fear. She'd seen the way the adults looked away from Ndidi's grave and wanted to understand for herself. From behind a tree, she watched as the priest knelt beside the grave, unwrapped his prayer cloth and began to chant. He poured palm oil in a circle, lit white candles and raised both hands high. And then his voice stopped. Not just paused. Stopped. He clutched at his throat, his eyes bulging. He tried to scream but made no sound. The candles flickered wildly. His mouth foamed. The child said his tongue swelled, thick like yam, too large for his teeth to close around. He fell forward, gasping, his eyes fixed on Ndidi's face just beneath the earth. She watched him. The girl ran. She told everyone. That evening, the priest was carried into his hut, unable to speak, unable to swallow. His tongue had darkened like burnt leather, and even the oldest healer could not explain why. The village finally understood. The earth might forgive. But Ndidi? She was not ready. They had buried her under lies. Under jealousy. Under silence. Now they saw the price. Some tried to fix it. Quietly, carefully. One by one they crept to her grave at dusk. They placed tokens, bracelets, coins, cloth dyed with indigo, ground kola nut, even letters scribbled with clumsy fingers. Forgive me. I believed them. You didn't deserve it. I remember the day you shared your food with me. But still her body did not change. Still she lay as though resting. And still Ojugo's grave rotted. More bones surfaced with every downpour. A tooth. A knuckle. A braid still twisted with the same coral bead she had worn to the festival before she died. The flies returned, fewer than before but no less determined. And with them came dreams. More and more villagers dreamed of Ndidi, not as a ghost or demon but as a girl. A girl with quiet eyes and a red mark on her brow, walking through their compounds, watching them from behind banana trees, standing at the river's bend with her hands dripping wet. One old man said he dreamed of her sitting beside him at night, shelling egusi seeds and humming softly. She didn't speak, he whispered. But I woke up with tears in my eyes. One woman said she felt Ndidi's hand brush her shoulder in a dream, just before her sick baby took its first full breath in days. Even the children no longer ran from her name. They sang songs about her, tapping rhythms on calabash bowls, tracing patterns in the dirt shaped like flowers. Ndidi did not die, they chanted. She only closed her eyes. The elders tried to contain it, but truth, once loosed, grows wild. Like weeds. Like justice. The oldest woman in the village, who had not spoken in years, rose one afternoon and said, "She must be brought up." They stared at her. "Not exhumed," she said. "Raised." "What are you saying?" one elder asked. "She was buried under a lie. And so she waits. Not for revenge. But for voice. We must give her voice." The village resisted. But the grave did not. That night, the flowers around her mound bloomed in full, like a crown of breath and bone. The next morning the grave was dry. Though it had rained all night, not a single drop had sunk into the earth around her. A sign, they said. One brave woman, a midwife with scars from childbirth and wisdom stitched into her fingers, led a gathering at dawn. They came without drums. Without fanfare. Just silence, footsteps, and humility. They brought a new wrapper. One woven with sky blue and earth brown. They brought coconut oil, water from the oldest spring, and 3 cowrie shells. They did not unearth her. They did not disturb her body. Instead, they knelt beside her grave and did the one thing they had never done. They called her by name. Ndidi, daughter of Ebel. Ndidi who was wronged. Ndidi who should have lived. Their voices were soft, cracked with shame, but steady. They poured water over the grave. They offered song. They spoke her truth where once they had buried it. They did not ask her to rise. They only promised to remember. To tell it differently. To let their children know that the girl beneath the earth was not what the chief's daughter had claimed her to be. She had not poisoned anyone. She had only lived. And for that she had died. The next day the priest's tongue returned to normal. The flies did not return. And for the first time since her burial, the villagers said Ndidi's name without fear. They would not exhume her. They would not disturb her peace. But they would speak her truth until it sang through the roots of the mango trees and settled in the stones of the market square. The earth had held her longer than it should. But the flesh that wouldn't fade had done more than survive. It had made them remember. The boy's name was Ikenna, and he was the kind of child who never listened. Not out of defiance. His was the disobedience of curiosity, not mischief. Where others said don't, he wondered why. Where others said danger, he tilted his head and asked, how much? The elders often sighed at him, swatting the back of his head with folded palms, but he laughed and kept moving. He was small, thin-legged, and full of a boldness too large for his age. It was this boldness that took him near the graveyard. His mother had sent him to collect red clay from the edge of the stream, where the women used to kneel and shape pots. But the rains had ruined the path, and the stream had bled into the burial grounds. The clay was rich there now, thick and damp beneath the surface. The other boys avoided the place. Everyone knew what lay there. Everyone still remembered the day the graves sighed. But Ikenna, in his usual way, thought, If the dead don't want visitors, they should lock their doors better. He walked barefoot, a small wooden bowl in one hand, and stopped just between the graves. The one with the old bones rising like sticks from the mud. The other where the earth refused to rot, still smooth and soft with wildflowers blooming even after weeks of storms. Ikenna glanced around, then knelt near the edge of Ndidi's grave. The ground was strangely warm. He pressed his fingers into it. The soil parted easily, loose and rich. He dug slowly, scooping clay with both hands, piling it into his bowl. That's when he saw it. A worm. Fat, dark, and unlike any he'd ever seen. Its body glistened with a sheen that caught the light in a strange way, more silver than brown, more like metal than mud. It didn't wriggle or flee like others. It simply rose up, half its length protruding from the soil, still and steady as if looking directly at him. Ikenna blinked, then laughed. "What are you doing, old worm?" he said aloud. "Do you want a name too?" He named it Obi. He reached to touch it. It vanished. Sank back into the earth with a slowness that seemed more deliberate than instinctive. Ikenna waited a moment, but it didn't return. He shrugged and carried his bowl back home. That night he dreamed. He stood in the same spot between the two graves. But the sky above was purple, and the trees leaned sideways as though bowing toward the mound. The air was thick and humming. He looked down, and there was the worm again, but this time it was enormous, curled in a spiral around his feet like a serpent made of soil and breath. Its mouth opened. Its voice was not loud, but it filled him. Not through his ears, but through his bones. Like a memory he'd never had. Only one was innocent. Ikenna stepped back, heart pounding. The worm moved, coiling tighter. One feeds the earth. He looked left. The bones of Ojugo's grave glowed red beneath the soil, steaming as if still bleeding. One is fed by it. He looked right. Ndidi's grave shimmered. From it, vines rose, vines made of hair, of pulse, of something older than roots. And above them, the flowers blinked open like eyes. Then he woke. He didn't speak for an hour. His mother clucked her tongue, smacking him gently with her cooking spoon. "What is wrong with you today? You finally listened too hard and your brain broke." He said nothing. But that night the dream returned. And the worm repeated its words. The third night it added something new. The living blamed the wrong soul. On the fourth day, Ikenna ran barefoot through the square, dragging the priest's hem until the man turned with a scowl. "I have a message," the boy gasped. "From the earth. From under." The priest had heard enough tales from this graveyard to know better than to dismiss him immediately. He followed Ikenna to the stream's edge, where the clay still bore signs of digging, and knelt. "Show me." "I can't," Ikenna said. "It doesn't come in the day." "What did it say?" Ikenna told him. Every word. The priest paled. He tried to hide it, but Ikenna noticed how the man's hands trembled. That night the priest fasted. He locked himself in his compound and poured circles of salt around every door. The next morning he summoned the other priests. By midday the village buzzed. The elders tried to suppress it. But fear, once loosed, grows wings. Ikenna's words ran through the village like water down cracked walls. Only one was innocent. One feeds the earth. One is fed by it. The women whispered it at their fires. The men repeated it while sharpening machetes in silence. The children sang it, turning it into a game. They stood between two trees, one Ojugo, one Ndidi, and shouted, "Which side will speak first?" The priests met beneath the kola tree at the center of the compound. Their robes were dark, their brows wet with oil and prayer. They debated in hushed tones, throwing cowries, reading ash. And every sign came back the same. Division. The gods refused to speak clearly. One priest, the youngest, rose and said, "We may have cursed the wrong soul." Another hissed through his teeth, "Then we must reverse it." "How?" the oldest among them asked. "She is buried. Twice. The grave took her. It's done." The youngest pointed toward the hills. The grave rejected one. Not both. "Are you not watching?" But none of them wanted to touch it. Touching it would mean confessing that they had failed. That their silence had killed a girl who never screamed, never begged, never cursed them even as the stones cracked her ribs. Still, the boy's dreams spread like fire in the wind. By the next week, people began returning to the grave with new offerings, not to ask forgiveness but to confess. A woman laid a bracelet carved from ivory and whispered, "I mocked her voice once. She sang better than me and I told Ojugo she was cursed. I lied." A man placed his staff of office on the soil and said, "I watched. And I said nothing." One by one more followed. They left pieces of themselves, their shame, their guilt. And each morning the ground around Ndidi's grave bloomed brighter. More flowers. More bees. And once, someone swore they saw a butterfly with wings like woven thread rest on the earth and pulse once before vanishing into light. But the grave beside her worsened. The bones now stretched beyond the mound. They slid from the soil like fingers trying to crawl out. And the smell, thick, metallic, sharp, followed the wind into the village square. No priest dared go near it. The worm returned to Ikenna in his sleep a final time. It was smaller now. Almost delicate. This time it curled in his palm. They gave her the death, it said, but not the silence. Ikenna nodded. What does she want? Nothing. Pause. Only to be heard. Then it dissolved into dust and the dreams stopped. The next morning Ikenna went to the grave alone. He knelt beside Ndidi and whispered, I hear you. Nothing moved. But the wind shifted. And deep below the earth something exhaled, not a sigh of grief this time but release. A slow, steady breath like the one you take after laying down a heavy burden. From that day on, no one dared speak of Ndidi as a curse. They spoke of her as the girl whose body fed flowers, whose silence shook a village, whose grave sang truths into children's dreams. And the worm? It never returned. But Ikenna, now older, tells the story to every child who listens too much. And every child who doesn't. Because some truths crawl out of the ground when lies can no longer hold them. They called it the last rite. By then, the village had become two things at once, quiet as a wound and loud with shame. No one walked past the graveyard anymore. The children had stopped their songs. The air itself had grown heavy, and even the birds avoided the trees that overlooked the twin graves. Crops wilted in the southern fields. 2 goats miscarried. A stream turned cloudy. The signs were everywhere and the message clear. Something must be undone. So the elders gathered beneath the kola tree with sagging eyes and dust on their tongues. Even those who had once shouted that Ndidi was cursed now whispered other things. She was wrongly buried. She was wrongly blamed. She never screamed. She never burned. It was that last phrase, murmured by a midwife during a night of fever dreams, that seeded the plan. If the earth will not take her and the water won't cleanse her, an elder muttered, then we must turn to fire. The next day they announced it to the village. The rite would be held in 3 nights on the new moon, when the sky was blackest and the spirits listened best. Both bodies would be exhumed. Both would be burned. Let the fire separate guilt from innocence. Let the flames devour what the earth refused to hide. They did not ask permission. The villagers came in silence, clothed in ash-colored wrappers, with no drums, no songs, only breath and the crunch of dirt beneath feet. 2 pits had been dug in the clearing beyond the burial grounds. One for Ojugo. One for Ndidi. Firewood was piled high, thick logs soaked in oil, dry palm fronds, coals glowing in clay pots. Smoke rose in steady tendrils like fingers reaching skyward. No one smiled. No one spoke above a whisper. The bodies were brought from the ground just before sunset. Ojugo's remains were brittle now. Her limbs fell apart as the men lifted her, pieces of bone tumbling from her burial cloth like dried sticks. Her face was no longer a face. The hair that had once been thick and adorned with coral beads was now a tangle of rot. They laid her in the pyre without ceremony. Then came Ndidi. She emerged like something the soil had been cradling, not hiding. Her skin was pale but intact. Her limbs were soft, unbroken. The blue wrapper she had been buried in was still wrapped around her like the embrace of a mother refusing to let go. She did not smell of death. She did not reek of waiting. There was a coolness to her body, a peace that unnerved even the bravest. They laid her on the second pyre. The priest came forward. The same one who had once led the first false rites against her. His hands trembled as he lifted the flaming branch toward the first pyre. Ojugo's body caught fire at once. The flames shot upward, wild and bright, consuming the bones like dry leaves. The crackling echoed across the clearing, loud and furious. Smoke billowed into the sky, dark and choking. Some swore they heard a shriek in the wind, a scream that twisted like a last lie clawing its way out. Then the priest turned to Ndidi. He stepped back, sweat thick on his brow. Another man stepped forward and touched the flame to the base of her pyre. The fire sparked, once, twice, but didn't catch. He tried again. The flames curled toward the wood, and curved away. The crowd stirred. A second torch was brought. A third. They poured more oil, scattered dried leaves. The fire would leap high in the air, but as soon as it came near Ndidi's body, it faltered. Curved to the left. Curved to the right. Refused. And still she lay there, still and whole, her face turned slightly as if listening to some far-off melody only she could hear. The flames tried again, and again they failed. They arched toward her, then bent like river reeds in wind, never touching. Never daring. Then a voice cracked through the air. It was the oldest woman in the village. Mmanri, who had not left her compound in 5 years, now stood barefoot at the edge of the crowd, hair wild, wrappers sagging from her shoulders. Her voice rose like a bone-splitting wood. "That's not a corpse," she shouted. "That's justice." All turned. She walked slowly, painfully to the pyre, her hand shaking as she pointed toward Ndidi. The earth knew. The worms knew. Even the fire knows. Another elder tried to hush her. She slapped the ground with her staff. "You covered her in lies, but not even flame will agree with you." The silence that followed was deeper than any they had known. The fire, still roaring beside her on Ojugo's side, gave one last groan and then collapsed inward. Smoke spiraled into nothing. Ash fell like gray rain. And Ndidi? Still cool. Still whole. Her body lay surrounded by untouched wood, by fire scorched on every side but hers. "She is not ours to burn," Mmanri said, weeping now. "She is not ours to bury again. She has become something else." One of the younger women, emboldened, stepped forward with a palm fan and began gently brushing away the ashes from around Ndidi's body. Another laid a piece of dyed cloth over her chest. Then a child walked forward and placed a small white stone on her palm. No one stopped them. And so it continued. One by one the villagers moved forward, not to finish what the fire could not, but to surrender, to accept, to witness. The priests watched in silence, their mouths dry with dread and reverence. The truth had stood in front of them for too long, and now it refused to be silenced. Ndidi was not ashes. Ndidi was not rot. Ndidi was not what they thought she should be. She was the part of justice they hadn't expected, the kind that waits without screaming, that breathes even when buried, that cools itself in the face of fire and says, "Not yet." By morning they did not try again. They did not touch the pyre. They built a new one for her, across the river in the sacred grove no longer used. Not for burning but for resting. They laid stones in a circle around the spot. They planted 3 trees, Akpaka, Udala, and Aroma, and promised never to harvest from them. They did not call it a grave. They called it a place of truth. And there Ndidi was left. Not as a warning. Not as a punishment. But as the only body too whole to be erased. The only girl who could not be broken by flame. The fire did not return for her. But the wind sometimes did, lifting petals from the 3 trees and carrying them across the village like secrets turned to blessings. And sometimes, just before dawn, those who passed by said they could feel a soft breeze curling around their ankles, cool as justice, and hear a voice on it. Not a scream. Not a curse. Just this, *I remember everything. But I forgive slowly, *. It began with the mirrors. Small ones at first, the handheld kind women used to check their wrappers, the glass embedded in combs, the shiny backs of old spoons. They all cracked. Not broken by hand or fall, but by something unseen, as if struck from within. The lines shot across the glass like lightning frozen in time. Then it spread. The larger mirrors in compounds, the one in the priest's hall, the polished plate of silver that hung in the chief's meeting house, they all shattered. Not at once. But in order, one after another, as if something walked through the village and glanced into each one, leaving ruin behind. By the 3rd day, no reflective surface remained whole. The night after the last mirror broke, the crops began to die. Yams twisted in the soil. Cassava turned to mush. Okra leaves shriveled as though kissed by fire. The ground, rich just the week before, cracked and refused to drink water. Goats refused to eat. Chickens scattered into the bush and didn't return. The dogs whimpered and dug holes with frantic paws, then curled inside them as if to hide from a sound no human could hear. Then came the voice. No one knew where it started. Some said it came from the forest. Others said it rose from the graveyard. One child swore it hissed from inside the village well. But they all agreed on one thing, the voice was hers. Ojugo. She had returned, not as bone, not as rot, not as a fading memory, but as something else. A scream. A wind. A fury. She shrieked through the air like a blade through silk, and with her came the scent of fire-damaged hair, of copper and salt, of old perfume and something too sweet, like fruit left too long in the sun. She watches me, the voice cried, rattling windows, shattering gourds. Even in death she watches. That was the first night. The next night the voice returned louder. She won't let go. The villagers could no longer sleep. Mothers kept their children pressed close. Fathers gripped machetes they knew were useless against spirits. Elders muttered prayers. Priests poured libations, but the palm wine turned to ash on the ground. A shadow passed along rooftops. Doors creaked open and slammed shut without a breeze. Palm trees bent when there was no wind. Then came the wilting. Plants grown in clay pots inside huts died overnight. Painted calabashes lost their color. Clothes once bright with dye turned dull. Even the beads children wore cracked and broke. The entire village dulled, like something had sucked the color from everything it touched. The people gathered at the shrine. "We've buried them," they told the priest. "We've done the right." The priest said nothing. "We burned the one who cursed us. We honored the one we wronged." Still he said nothing. "Then why does she return?" A gust of wind shot through the shrine like a scream. "She won't let go." The voice again, shaking the walls, slamming the sacred drums against the ground. That night someone saw her. A boy fetching water saw her form crouched at the edge of the stream, her back turned. He said her head moved like a bird's, jerking, listening. When she turned, her face was hollow where the eyes should be, and in their place were two coals burning blue. Another saw her walking between huts, dragging something behind her, maybe a bundle of hair, maybe a shadow. She whispered Ndidi's name over and over like a curse and a prayer twisted into one. The people were terrified. But not of Ndidi. Of Ojugo. Her rage did not feel righteous. It did not come from grief. It came from being watched. "She sees me," the spirit screamed one night, circling above the village like a cyclone of sound. "She stands at the edge of the veil. She won't look away." The villagers began to light fires at night, not to keep out the spirit, but to illuminate every corner. They feared shadows now, not for what they hid, but for what they revealed. Some villagers began sleeping with their backs to walls, too afraid to face the dark alone. Then came the dreams. People began waking in the middle of the night with dirt in their mouths. They dreamed of crawling, of digging, of being trapped beneath wood and stone. In every dream, someone stood at the edge of the grave. Ndidi. But she did not smile. She did not accuse. She only watched. Calm, still, her eyes open and endless. Some wept upon waking. Others went mute for days. The rival's own family began to suffer. Mama Ojugo's arms turned blue from shoulder to fingertip. No medicine helped. The chief's brother, who had once called for Ndidi's death, began sleepwalking. Every night found walking toward the sacred grove where Ndidi now rested, his hands open as if begging. The daughter of Ojugo's cousin saw the spirit hover over her bed and whispered, "She was never this angry in life." "Of course she wasn't," replied her grandmother. "She had power then." That was the truth. Ojugo had ruled when she breathed. Now she howled because someone she'd once silenced refused to be forgotten. She was supposed to be nothing, the spirit screeched on the seventh night. She was supposed to be food for worms. She was supposed to stay dead. "She watches," it screamed. "She watches and I cannot rest." The priest finally spoke. "She is not haunting us," he said to the elders. "She is being haunted." The elders froze. Ojugo is the ghost. But Ndidi, she is the mirror. Silence fell. For a moment they all felt it, that it was not rage that disturbed the nights but fear. That the ghost of the favored girl, the proud daughter of a chief, could not bear the gaze of the one she had buried. That it was not vengeance from Ndidi that chased them, but memory. One brave elder, voice dry with regret, said, "Then what do we do?" The priest said nothing for a long time. Then, "You cannot beg peace from a spirit who flees her own reflection." They understood then that Ojugo would not go. Because Ndidi had not. Not truly. Not completely. Some part of her stood still, watching. And Ojugo, in all her fury, could not look back without breaking. That night no one lit fires. They let the shadows come. And in them they saw two shapes. One small, standing at the grove's edge. The other, larger, loud, distorted, whirling like a scream across the sky. The people knelt. Not to banish the ghost, but to bear witness. The screams grew quieter. Not gone, but fainter. Because now the village no longer feared being watched. They had learned to look back. They said it was the only way. The elders had debated for days beneath the shrine's collapsing roof, their voices hoarse, eyes dim with worry. The shrieks had stopped, yes, but the dreams had not. People still woke with sweat-soaked wrappers and trembling hands. Babies cried when placed too close to the old graves. Goats refused to graze near the fire-cleared ground where Ojugo's fury had once howled. A decision was made, they would separate the dead. Ndidi would be moved. Not as punishment, but as reverence. The priest declared it on the 8th dawn. A new grave would be dug at the base of the Irako tree, the oldest in the sacred grove. That tree, untouched by storms or age, stood taller than any in the village, its roots twisted deep into secrets only the ancestors knew. No one had been buried beneath it before. It was not a place of rest, it was a place of honor. But for Ndidi they would make an exception. They prepared for 3 days. The women wove blue cloth wide as wings. The men carved small totems, birds with broken beaks, flames that did not touch the wood. Children collected flowers, white and yellow, with petals soft as whispers. When the time came, the entire village walked behind her. No wails, no drums. Only voices singing one song, slow and strange, a tune no one remembered teaching but everyone seemed to know. Ndidi's body was lifted once more. Even after all this time her skin had not changed. Her lips remained slightly parted as if caught mid-thought. Her eyes remained shut but calm. The cloth was wrapped tight around her, and the women placed their hands on her shoulders, not in grief but in quiet apology. At the Irako's roots they dug the new grave. Not too deep, not too dark. And when they placed her inside they poured water first, spring water, fresh and sweet, so her new resting place would not taste of old earth. The totems were placed around her. The petals sprinkled. The villagers sang once more. Then they sealed the ground and circled it with white chalk, whispering her name as they walked away. Ojugo's remains, what little had not burned, were taken to the edge of the village. Buried in silence. No song. No offerings. The earth there was hard and cracked. No one followed. For a few nights things felt still. The air softened. The animals returned to grazing. The mothers began singing again while cooking. A child laughed, a real laugh, for the first time in days. But the dreams did not stop. They changed. They came not with screams but with whispers. Soft, slithering voices that curled into the ears of those who had once looked away, once lied, once cheered when stones struck innocent skin. These dreams didn't chase or shout. They simply spoke. She knew you lied. She forgave you, but only in part. She remembers who spat first. Some villagers woke to find white petals on their beds. Others saw faint footprints, barefoot, small, always pointing toward the Irako tree. One woman swore the roots of the tree had shifted overnight, curling like fingers. A man dreamed of being buried alive with his own voice taken from him. Only the guilty had such dreams. Those who had mourned Ndidi honestly, those who had confessed, slept without fear. But others, the ones who had stood silent, who had joined the mob, who had smiled as she was dragged, felt the weight return. One elder, unable to bear it, went to the tree with a bowl of water and whispered an apology. The next morning the whispers stopped, for him. One by one the others followed. Now, at the base of the Irako tree the earth is never dry. Offerings come daily, kola nuts, beads, coins, cloth. No one dares neglect it, not because they fear vengeance, but because they fear truth. Ndidi does not howl. She does not haunt. She waits. And sometimes when the wind shifts just right through the Irako branches, a single voice rises through the leaves, not angry, not loud. Just watching. The stone was ordinary when they placed it. Smooth, gray and cold. A flat slab carried by 4 boys who didn't know Ndidi in life but had learned her name in whispers, their mother's regrets, their father's silence. They set it gently above the grave, just beyond the roots of the Irako tree. No name was carved into it. No title, no year. Only a shallow spiral traced by the village carver, a mark older than script, one that meant memory, in the tongue spoken before the people forgot how to listen. It was meant to be a marker, nothing more. But 3 days after it was placed, the stone wept. Not rain. There had been none. Not dew. The other stones nearby remained dry. But this one, Ndidi's, glistened at dawn with streaks that ran in delicate curves, not the splatter of sky water but the slow trails of something sorrowful. 2 clean lines from the spiral outward, twin arcs down its face. The first to see it was the girl who swept the grove. She froze, broom midair, heart snagging in her chest. At first she said nothing. But the next morning it wept again. And the next. She told her mother, who told the healer, who told the priest. The priest came himself. He touched the stone. It was warm. The lines were moist. The scent was salt. He did not speak for a long time. By the end of the week, half the village had come to see it. Some knelt. Some left small offerings, a comb, a mango, beads and pale thread. Others touched the stone and wept without knowing why. No one tried to wipe the tears away. The stone somehow cried for them all. Then the tree began to speak. Not in voice. In pattern. It shed its leaves, suddenly all at once, early one morning. And when the villagers returned later that day, they found the leaves not scattered, not blown wild by the wind, but arranged, spread carefully across the soil in curling, unmistakable shapes. Someone cried out. The others gathered, staring in disbelief. 2 words, formed in yellow and green. I remember. The children asked who had done it. The elders looked away. Some said the wind had learned to write. Others said the roots had whispered the shapes upward through the trunk. Still others believed it was Ndidi herself. No longer a girl, no longer even spirit, but now something elemental. Something that had soaked into the Irako tree the way grief soaks into the bones and cannot be bled out. Word reached the old priestess. She had not been seen since the day Ndidi was first buried. The day she turned her face away as the stones fell. They said she had gone mad in her silence, that her hair had turned white overnight and her voice refused to come out except in song. But one morning she appeared. Then, a walking stick in one hand and a broken gourd in the other. Her wrappers were the color of dust, but her eyes, though sunken, were dry. She went straight to the stone. She did not speak. She knelt, pressed her head to it, and stayed there until the sun had passed the high tree. When she stood, she poured the contents of her gourd, plain water, into the soil. Then she left. She returned the next week. And the week after. Always kneeling. Always silent. Sometimes leaving a stone, sometimes a feather. The villagers stopped asking questions. The children began calling her Mother of the Stone. They made room for her when she came. Even the birds fell silent when she knelt. One morning, the villagers arrived early and found the leaves arranged again. Not in words this time, but in shape. A spiral wrapped around a small dot like an eye inside a wave. The carver recognized it. Justice, he whispered. But not the loud kind. After that, the grove became a place of pilgrimage. Not for answers. Not for healing. But to sit, to kneel, to listen to what the ground remembered. Some swore they could feel a heartbeat if they pressed their ear to the stone. Others said they dreamed of water and fire and a girl who never blinked. But no one questioned the tears. The stone still weeps some mornings. Not always. Not for everyone. But enough. Enough to remind them that silence was once a crime. And memory now is a kind of mercy. It happened when memory had thinned. The grove was still there, but the songs had faded. The tree still stood, vast and ancient, but fewer people came now. The children no longer asked who lay beneath the stone. The elders had grown older or gone quiet or gone altogether. Time had done what time always does. It softened the sharp edges. It pressed its thumb over the truth, blurring it until only the outline remained. The digger didn't know the story. He had been sent to clear land for a new path. Not through the grove, exactly, but close enough that the iron tip of his tool broke the edge of the sacred circle. He didn't mean to. He had no intention to disturb. He was just a man with sweat on his brow, a job to do, and little knowledge of the name Ndidi. When his hoe struck bone, he paused. He brushed the dirt away. A skull yellowed and cracked. He knelt and worked slower, careful now, not out of reverence. He didn't know he was near a grave, but because something in the air had shifted. It felt heavier, thicker, as though the ground was watching him. More bones appeared. Thin, brittle, folded in on themselves. Then something else. Beside the bones. Something that was not bone. Something soft. He blinked. It was flesh. Skin. Whole. Smooth. Not rotten. Not leathery. Not blackened like old death. Soft. Pinkish brown. Cool to the touch. Pressing back against his fingers like the cheek of someone sleeping. It pulsed, once. He screamed. Dropped the hoe. Fell back into the leaves. He scrambled away on hands and feet, didn't stop running until he reached the river. He bathed himself 3 times. Wouldn't speak for hours. When he finally did, he only said, there were bones. But she wasn't bones. The chief summoned the priest. The priest summoned the old maps. The maps confirmed it. He had dug along the grove's edge. Just close enough. And so, the old story was pulled out from under dust. Told again. Whispered first. Then louder. Then wide. People returned to the grove. Some with fear. Some with guilt. Others with awe. The spot was marked again. Not with a simple stone this time, but a small shrine, built of wood and clay, painted white. They placed it over where her grave had once been. No door. No idol. Just a platform and space to kneel. Offerings returned. Not in baskets or bundles. But in quiet. People came to speak their truths. I lied when they asked me if she was alone. I threw one of the stones. I was afraid to say her name. The shrine listened. Sometimes a breeze passed through when no wind blew. Sometimes the Irako tree dropped one leaf at a time, never two, never three, just one, as if nodding. But the tale that never faded was the flesh. How it had not decayed. How it had outlived the bone. How is that possible? One girl asked. The priestess, now old and near blind, replied, because she was never buried with peace. A young man asked, is it a blessing? The priestess shook her head. No. It's proof. The villagers understood. Not all decay is equal. Time does not rot what truth protects. Not when the guilt is buried beside it, still sour, still trembling. And when injustice lies down next to innocence, something must remain to remember. Some say the flesh was later moved. Others say it sank back into the earth once the shrine was built. But one thing is agreed. You cannot bury wrongness in the same ground as what was right and expect both to fade the same way. Something will resist. Something will wait. And when the spade returns, it will rise. Ndidi had not wept when they dragged her from her mother's hut. She had not screamed. Not when the women of the village tore her wrappers, spit on her face, or tied her wrists with thick ropes made of palm fiber. It wasn't pride that held her still. It was disbelief, raw and thick in her chest, stealing her breath. How could something so absurd feel so final? The chief's daughter, Ojugo, lay in state under the mango tree where the elders always held judgment. Her body was wrapped in white, with red beads placed on her fingers and wrists, her hair combed back so tightly it seemed painted onto her skull. She looked regal, untouched, as though she had only gone to sleep. But she was dead. And according to the whispers that had spread faster than fire on dry thatch, it was Ndidi who had killed her. Poison, they said. Bitter leaf soaked in goat bile and added to Ojugo's evening broth. A method too subtle for most to notice, except the village healer who examined the girl after her sudden collapse. Her tongue was black, he'd muttered, and her eyes rolled back like something pulled her from the inside. No one questioned it. No one questioned why Ndidi would do such a thing. No one paused to wonder what kind of person she really was. Because everyone already knew the story they wanted to believe. Ndidi and Ojugo had grown together in the same compound, but their paths had never aligned. While Ndidi fetched water and swept courtyards, Ojugo wore coral beads and danced at festivals. Ndidi was clever, quiet, and strange. Ojugo was golden, laughing, and favored. Always favored. Even by the chief himself. And in the village of Umualu, where everything was weighed by status and favor, that made Ndidi dangerous. Envy. That was the motive they fed themselves. When the sun reached its peak and the air turned thick with the scent of dust and grief, the villagers gathered. Ndidi's mother, Mama Ebel, pushed through the crowd, her wrapper hanging loose, headscarf forgotten. She flung herself before the council of elders, her face streaked with ash, her voice hoarse from weeping. She is innocent, she cried over and over again. She is innocent. But no one met her eyes. Even the priestess, tall and wrapped in red cloth from neck to toe, remained silent. She stood beside the chief's stool, her cowries clinking at her waist, her eyes fixed beyond the world of mortals. She would not speak for Ndidi. Not now. Not after this. The chief's voice was like thunder when he finally stood. Let the earth judge between them, he said. There would be no trial. No cleansing. No ritual to determine truth. Instead, they marched Ndidi to the edge of the village, where the graves of honored children lay. And there, beside the shallow resting place of Ojugo, they began to gather stones. Ndidi's hands were still bound. Her mother clung to her waist, begging. Let me die with her. Let me take her place. Please. Please. A man struck Mama Ebel with the flat of his hand, knocking her to the ground. Another man dragged her away as she screamed, She is not the one. She is not the one. Please, I saw her, she was with me that night. The first stone struck Ndidi's shoulder. The second hit her hip. She remained standing, refusing to cry. Even as her blood spattered the earth, even as one caught her temple and split it open. Her knees buckled. She collapsed to the ground, gasping for breath. But still they threw. Some shouted. Some wept. Others turned their backs, unable to watch. The priestess remained unmoved. It was a boy she once shared roasted yam with under the fig tree, who placed the final stone. A large one, flat and heavy. He didn't look her in the eye. When it struck her chest, Ndidi stopped moving. They left her there, beside Ojugo, in a pit barely deep enough to swallow them both. Someone poured palm oil over the grave. Someone else muttered, Now their hatred will be buried forever. But hatred does not bury so easily. That night the rain came early. Angry, wild rain. The kind that broke branches and churned the earth. It flooded the fields. It soaked the rooftops. It beat against the village like a curse. Mama Ebel crawled from her hut and sat before the grave, her arms wrapped around herself. She did not flinch beneath the downpour. She spoke into the mud, soft and steady. Ndidi, I know you are listening. I know you are not gone. You are my daughter. And I will call you back if I have to tear the sky open myself. She sang her lullaby, the one from when Ndidi was small and afraid of the dark. In the morning the villagers found her there, drenched and silent, her eyes swollen shut from crying. The sun returned. The days passed. And still the ground did not settle. Strange things began to happen. The goats refused to graze near the burial ground. Chickens laid eggs with blood in their shells. A baby cried non-stop until it was carried far from the site. The elders sent word to the priestess. She came again, this time barefoot, her face painted in chalk. She poured water onto the grave and waited for it to soak. It didn't. The water beaded and rolled away. The earth rejects this, she said finally, voice hollow. Something is not right. But it was too late. The villagers had seen what they'd done. And now they feared it. That night, 3 girls claimed to see a shadow move across their compound. Not a spirit, they said. A girl. Limping. Bloody. Silent. Her mouth was sealed shut with red thread. When they told the priestess, she gathered cowries and kola nuts, threw them to the ground and read the pattern. She paled. She was not meant to die, she said. Mama Ebel laughed when they came to her. Laughed until her voice cracked. Now you come to ask for truth? They offered her yams. She kicked them aside. They offered her wine. She spat it out. Dig, she said. Dig where you buried her. No one wanted to. But fear makes men desperate. They returned to the gravesite with shovels and trembling hands. The soil was soft. Too soft. It gave way quickly, too quickly. And then, there it was. Only one body. A doggo's. Wrapped in white. Face still untouched. But where was Ndidi? Only blood remained. Blood and ropes torn as though bitten through. They searched the forest, the riverbanks, the cliffs. They did not find her. But they found something else. At the entrance of the chief's compound, someone had drawn a symbol in ash. It was old, older than any charm the priestess recognized. And beside it, a message in charcoal, I carry the death that wasn't mine. The chief fell ill that night. His mouth foamed. He clawed at his skin, swearing he could hear someone whispering his name in the dark. The healer came, but no herb could ease his mind. He died by morning, eyes wide open, lips torn from screaming. One by one others followed. Those who had thrown stones. Those who had watched and said nothing. The boy who placed the final rock was found at the river, floating face down, mouth stuffed with pebbles. The priestess vanished. No trace. Her red cloth left hanging on the edge of the village shrine. And then the rain returned. Not just for a night, but for 7 days straight. The river overflowed. The crops drowned. Houses collapsed. Mama Ebel sat alone in her hut, her fire untouched. When the storm passed, she walked to the edge of the village and sang once more. Some say they saw her talking to a girl with a cracked face and red thread on her wrists. Some say the girl limped toward the forest and disappeared. Others say she never left, that she walks the